I'm here today with former Wallabies captain and current Nine Sports editor Andrew Slack. Andrew, thank you for your time today.
Pleasure, Lewis.
So first of all, what made you decide to be a sports commentator?
I sort of fell into it really. I was a school teacher and playing footy and finished and wondered where to go next. And I'd done a bit of journalism at uni just because I was interested in reading about sport.
Yeah.
And I quite like to write, quite like to read. Had a sporting background, and with a bit of that uni study, I probably got a leg in which some other people wouldn't have because of the background footy-wise. Jumped in, and 25 years later, here I am.
Well, with such experience in rugby and your knowledge of the game, how did you approach reporting on less familiar sports? Were you familiar with all sports, or did you find it difficult?
Yeah, no, I was pretty well a sports lover. So I knew, I'd say I knew a lot about a few sports, your cricket and your rugby league and your rugby and golf, and enough passable to get by in other things. I wouldn't pretend I know one end of a motor car from the other really, but you learn on the run. Yeah. And you realise you need to do what is. Don't pretend you know something you don't.
Yeah. When writing articles or reporting on stories, do you do your own research?
Oh yeah, but I mean today's world you can click a button and you get a lot of research. I think when we first started, you really did have to do a lot of hard slog. But now, if I need to find out about how Lewis Richardson went in the under-15s, I press a button and generally find it. So look, you do use people who can help, and just the colleagues I work with, I'll ask them something I don't know, but there's always a way of finding things out otherwise.
Do you write your final copy, or are there other journalists and editors that help?
Because I'm old and sort of been around, I tend to have the final say on my own, and if I make a blue, it's my problem. But generally the guys within the sporting news in our department will do a script, write it, stick it all together and just chuck it through to me so I can be a second set of eyes, and if I think there's an improvement, we'll have a discussion about it. If they make an error, well obviously we fix it up. But yeah, and I tend, if I've written something, I might say to one of the guys, just have a look at this and see if I've made a blue that I can't see, because often that can happen. You've written it sort of 5 times, checked it 10, and by the time you've done that, you're sort of blind to the obvious error. So it's always good to have it counter checked, no matter how senior or junior you might be.
Yeah. If you're at a sports event per se, reporting or commentating, and a disaster would have happened. This happened at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, and the sports journalist wasn't able to report on another news story. How would you have dealt with this, and do you think sports journalists are able to cover breaking news stories or current affairs?
Well, I think again in today's world you have to be able to. You've got to be able to shift one foot to the other. If you happen to be thrown in the middle of it, I'd prefer that not to happen, because I don't have much interest in that sort of type of reporting. But the reality is, and in fact, when we're doing this interview, there's something happening with the state of origin, which there's a question that needs to be asked of somebody involved, which has absolutely nothing to do with a football that's about to be played. But because we've got a sports journalist there, she's probably the one who's going to have to ask that question. So, there is a crossover. The ideal world, you have crime reporters doing crime and football reporters doing football, but sometimes you've got to do some tap dancing.
What do you believe is the difference between a sports commentator and a sports journalist?
Oh, well, I mean, the sports commentator's got to be able to talk. There's a lot of sports journalists who, would struggle to put one word after the other. In realistic terms, just stick a microphone and a camera, and generally, you can cope with doing a minute piece to camera or having a Q&A, but to actually call a game is a whole different skill. I mean, horse racing, for instance, I think if you're a horse racing commentator, you're born with that. It's like you're born with a good singing voice. I don't think you can create it. So there is a different. Both can be each, if you know what I mean. You can be a good sports journalist and sports commentator, but there's no guarantee. They are individual and separate skills.
Do you think even if they don't have the skill set, the public would rather a sports commentator be a previous player or a known celebrity just to have?
Look, the current way is that you definitely do use a lot of former players, but I think long-standing commentators who aren't necessarily great players who have shown that they know what they're talking about and they've gained credibility over a number of years. I think people like them. I mean, you look at the Ray Warrens and the Bruce McAvaney's, and there's a bunch of people I think are very good. You're unlikely in today's world again to get an expert commentator who wasn't an expert player. I'm not sure that that's completely right. I'm sure there's a few punters out there who've seen enough footy or cricket or whatever it might be to be able to offer very good opinion, but unless you've played 50 tests, you're less likely to get the job than the person who has.
Yeah. And what is the benefit of having a sports personality reporting on the news for those reasons?
Well, it comes back to credibility. I suppose people think you know what you're talking about. You've been on either sides of the camera or either sides of the microphone, however you want to put it. So from that point of view, it's completely understandable. One knows how what the heat of battle is sporting-wise. Unless you've been there, you probably don't. So from that point of view, if you can translate that information properly, that's where the advantage of having had a career in sport is obvious.
Now, what do you see as the future of sports reporting in Australia? Is there a place for the regular sports journalist, or will we see an influx of ex-players and less people doing sports journalism degrees?
Oh no, I think there's always going to be a place, because there's not a million great sportsmen who can translate to the next arena. But there's a lot of interested and keen and good writers and talkers who haven't reached the heights in sport who are able to talk and report on it. So I don't think the fact of trying to drag ex-sports people into the business is going to stop. That's going to keep rolling on. But I think you find, particularly in newspapers, your majority of your sporting people will be ones who have just done the hard yards and following it, love the game, like to write, like to read, like to present. So no, I don't think there'll be a shutout of the average Joe, so to speak.
And so do you think most ex-players are competent in the way of playing the game? They will know the game, so they find the transition to media easy? They don't need a degree?
I don't think any of them find the transition necessarily easy. Some of us are better chatters than others. I mean, there are people in the sporting who played sport who can't really put the point across to a viewer, but might be able to put it across to a team as a coach. So we all have different skill sets, and the media aren't going to grab a great footballer and just chuck him into a media position unless over time he proves that he can handle it. They may give them a go initially. If there's no improvement, well, I think that the public they got too big a dose of the smarts to want to put up with somebody who can't actually do the job that he or she's hired to do.
Well, Andrew, thank you for your time today. It's been a wonderful insight, and thank you again.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.